Morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to another edition of the Internet Governance Briefing by the Geneva Internet Platform and DiploFoundation. We are approaching the summer, so this is the last chunk of updates for before summer, and today we'll cover the main developments of June, and actually we'll look a little bit further back and distinguish two interesting trends, maybe as food for thought as we go towards summer break. For those of you that might be new with us today, firstly welcome. The outline of the session is the following. We cover a couple of main trending topics. This time will be two main trending topics with guests, but we also encourage you to be active. Use the chat to the maximum possible extent, share your thoughts, your views, your questions, and we have my colleague Ginger Pak who is going to moderate the chat and help feeding your inputs throughout the briefing, throughout discussions. Today's main topics that we start with, or the trending topics, are the following. One is Africa. Certainly it's not a topic itself, but not just because there were a couple of very important events happening in Africa in June, we are seeing the increasing relevance of Africa in global internet governance arrangements. So we'll look a little bit about the past, the present, the future, and what is the impact of Africa on global digital policy arrangements. The second topic is the artificial intelligence, and it has been a buzzing word around the media, not least because of these news from Google. So we'll look a little bit at where we are actually with AI, but more importantly, what are the key policy challenges and what are some of the global developments or developments around the world when it comes to digital policies. We usually have with us this briefing Jovan Kurbalija, Director of DiploFoundation, remotely joining from Geneva. Today I'm pleased to have him in the studio with us. Jovan, welcome. So Jovan will help us decoding these topics. And I'll start straight with the first topic, Jovan, and that's Africa. We have been touching upon that in the previous briefings a little bit, but we haven't really focused. So we decided to focus this time for maybe two direct reasons. There were two big events which happened this month in Africa. One was the Commonwealth Head of Governments. The other one was the ITU World Telecom Development Conference, two very important events happening, actually both of them in Rwanda, right?
In Kigali. Yeah.
In Kigali. And there will be the IGF coming at the end of this year in Addis, and there are many other developments, and we will reflect also on some interesting examples from the African states, particularly Nigeria. We'll bring a dear guest afterwards as well. But I want to start with a question with you. What is the importance of Africa now in these global digital arrangements? And you have been working on a study, a very interesting one, which will be completed very soon, on the readiness of Africa when it comes to digital foreign policy and developments. What are the reflections from these two main events and generally the importance of Africa in global digital politics?
Sure. Well, it's great to be in studio here, and thank you for this question, which, as you indicated, coincides with our work on a simple question, research question. How strong are African voices in global digital policy making? And so far in our study, which is getting to close to 200 pages, we identified the weakness of African voices in global digital policy processes. Participation, even formal participation, but I would say even more meaningful participation in issues on standardization, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence. And this is changing. There are more and more African countries participating in, let's say, open-ended working group. IGF will be coming to Addis. There is very vibrant technical community from Africa, which is not typical diplomatic representation, but they represent interests of their countries. Founders of the internet in different regions, Afrinic, and the other technical actors. Therefore, there are many building blocks. And the main challenge for Africa is how to put these building blocks together in inclusive, broader, both multilateral but also multi-stakeholder approach by maximizing talents. And this is the key challenge, not only for Africa, I would say, for many countries, because participating in digital negotiations is becoming extremely demanding in terms of resources, policy experience, institutional capacities. And our study, which will be presented in September, which is conducted by our colleague Sorina Teleanu and myself, will be based, and with support of Swiss Ministry of Foreign Affairs, will basically outline the current situation and what are the challenges. What we have noticed so far in our research, I can say there are some good news and some bad news. Let me start with the bad news. Media coverage tend to position Africa as basically having to decide between two major digital actors, United States on the other side and China. But when you really unpack the developments, you can see that in some fields, Chinese companies like Huawei are very active, let's say on 5G, but in other fields, you have the Western companies, US, European companies, and I think that need to have more analog, less digital, either or situation will be the major challenge for Africa. And African leaders and African stakeholders are basically framing the discussion around their development needs, not necessarily if they have to side with anyone, as they shouldn't be basically forced. Therefore, that's sort of in global public media, when you follow the articles, you can see that basically this is new geopolitical battle. And there are elements, let us not be naive about this view, but the situation on the ground is much more diverse, with both US, Western and Chinese companies, but also local businesses. In places like Nigeria, we'll hear from Emmanuel, you have very vibrant e-commerce space. Rwanda is well known, Kenya is actor, but also some emerging actors like Namibia, like Senegal. There is a lot of dynamism. And what is certain is that this is the space and this is a continent for the future digital growth. In terms of new users of the internet, in terms of new businesses, in terms of new applications, creative application, M-Pesa is often quoted, but there are some other applications in food delivery in other spaces. And I think responsibility of global community and United Nations is to showcase these examples and to give them more prominence in media and to have more discussion about Africa as a new way to create inclusive, impactful digital developments instead of traditional framing of geopolitical space of fight between, in this case, two major digital powers, China and the United States. Narrative has to be changed.
There's an interesting question, and you mentioned the focus in the past seems to have been, and still is to some extent, is the infrastructure development in Africa. And if we look at the results of the, for instance, the final declaration of the Kigali Action Plan of the ITU now, the World Telecom Development Conference, of course, it's not just about Africa, it's about developing countries, but it still has a lot of emphasis on connecting schools, fundraising for the connectivity across Africa. There are some mentions of entrepreneurship as well, but there is still a lot of focus on connectivity. On the other hand, we can see increasing African participation, probably interest as well, in other topics. For instance, in the UN, we have these negotiations on cybercrime convention. We have seen more than 40 delegations of Africa being there at the organizational session of the ad hoc committee, maybe a little bit less present in the open-ended working group about cyber norms, maybe about a dozen. They're not necessarily hyperactive, but they are there. And we have seen also quite an African stamp and participation in the UNESCO work on AI and ethics and so on. So it seems that this portfolio of topics that are of interest in Africa is broadening, and that we can expect, and we'll touch upon that in a minute on this Nigerian case as well, that we can see other topics now dominating the African agenda, not just connectivity necessarily. Any reflections on that?
That's correct. And if you follow the evolution of the debates in Africa, there was just for a long time just technical access. Let us have first submarine cables. Later on, it shifted to the last mile, connected the huge continent. Then it shifted more to affordable access, that people can afford to pay for access because it's still very expensive. And this is still big issue. I think cables are more or less there. They're basically going around the continent, and obviously should be improved, and it always there is space for improvement. Even last mile is changing with the local orbit satellites, with SpaceX, but also few European initiatives and Chinese initiatives. I would predict that the problem of pure technical access will be solved rather soon, because there are also business interests. On that access, there is one problem that we should be careful. We usually focus on next billion users. Next billions are in urban centers, they're just to be connected. But the real challenge is to focus on bottom billion, people who are away in remote areas. That's on technical and affordable access. But what we have been noticing is that, as you indicated, there is more and more focus to the meaningful use of the internet. Therefore, there was a technical, affordable, now meaningful for education, for business, for financial inclusion. M-Pesa is one example. And here Africa is starting to face some dilemmas. For example, in Kenya, we have increasing use of digital networks and M-Pesa for digital online gambling, which governments alerted and the regulators to do something about it. Therefore, discussion is becoming much more and more sophisticated, discussing crime, usability, education, e-commerce. And this is a clear evolution, and I would say it will accelerate in coming years towards question of also data, AI, digital identity, e-commerce, you name it and you have it.
If nothing, based on what you mentioned, that there is more and more entrepreneurship in Africa, so you'll be part of the economy, and also there's a huge pile of data, personal data, if nothing. And this is maybe a good moment to bring in another guest with us. And before that, I'll just encourage all of you, again, share your comments at any points, your thoughts, your questions, examples in the chat, and we'll bring Ginger a little bit later in the discussion to summarize the reflections. But now I want to introduce a dear guest, Emmanuel Adet, who is Assistant Director at the National IT Development Agency in Nigeria. And Emmanuel, besides being in this field of digital policy for a long time, he has also been working most directly, if I can say, on the current draft bill, Nigerian draft bill, which is related to social media. And this is an interesting showcase, just one of the showcases, how African countries are also taking a step towards regulating something which we used to discuss previously in previous briefings between, Europe, US, China, and the big guys. And now we actually have the African countries there. Emmanuel, welcome. And before maybe telling us a little bit more about the Nigerian Draft Act and basically what you intend to do with social media and how are you shaping the relations between Nigeria and maybe the big tech, which are abroad as well. If you have any reflections on what we discussed, Jovan and I, before, feel free to add that as well. Emmanuel.
Thank you very much, Vlada. It's my pleasure to be here once again. And thank you, Jovan. It's been one of those long journeys by our country, Nigeria. We are beginning to see an increased use of the internet in Africa generally, and the big tech companies are actually making their presence known in Africa. For example, they've got contacts within the continent, they've got markets within the continent, they are promoting initiatives that will further enhance access to the internet in the continent. They've also done a lot in terms of providing access. Recently, I think we've received a cable, on the sea cable from Google here in Nigeria, and there are a whole lot of initiatives. So the thing is, for the commercial purpose of the internet, the big techs have recognized Africa as an emerging market. Maybe no more emerging, but an emerged market. And these markets, they need to tap into the resources available in this market. And so by making their presence in this market physically visible, they've also exposed themselves to issues that are associated in markets that are in Africa. And globally, we understand that irrespective of the fact that the internet is a space that is mainly controlled outside the African continent, it's also a space that is beginning to evolve into a democratic, should I call it, battleground, where the interest of many people, including Africans, are actually taken into consideration when dealing with policies that affect the internet. So in my opinion, Africa is an emerging power as far as internet policy is concerned. And so dealing with these big tech companies is just a matter of considering the market value of your country to these big tech companies and making sure that the safety of citizens are actually managed properly when using big tech.
Emmanuel, if I can build up on that, what you mentioned, on one hand, there are very interesting bits in the proposal, such as, again, building up on the control of the content or policy, content policy. On the other hand, taxation, which is also very interesting. But you can certainly elaborate on that if you wish. But my question is, Nigeria is a big country. It has economic power in a way, probably to press a number of platforms to some extent. But it would definitely be more powerful if more African states would get together. Do you have the feeling that the other countries in Africa would be following the similar pattern? Okay, in this field, when it comes to social media and big tech, but also in other fields. Do you feel that the African countries are somehow starting to work together on common policies and maybe common impact on, well, big tech in this case, but in general in digital environment?
I think globally there's always been the drive to have a common platform and a common approach to handling big tech issues, especially as far as content on the internet is concerned. And globally, we've seen different approaches from the Americans and the Europeans in terms of managing big tech, but there's a common denominator, and that common denominator is that at some point there is a need to actually address issues of content online that actually cause harm. And I think that's the approach that most African countries are taking at the moment. I was in a conversation with someone from Gambia, a friend of mine, and like you mentioned, Vlada, he basically said if Nigeria does it, everyone is going to toe the line to deal with this big tech firm as far as the African cyberspace is concerned. But one of the challenges that we have in Africa is that we have a lot of diverse culture. We have a lot of individual states that focus more on other issues apart from internet governance and things that affects the citizen. That alone is a challenge on its own. But as African countries begin to realize that in this space, they do have some form of say, especially as far as their market capacity is concerned, I see a possibility of actually creating a sort of unified approach to dealing with internet governance issues, especially as far as the big techs are concerned. Going back to Nigeria, one of the reasons that we took the steps we took was basically because we realized that there are lots of content controlled by the big tech which actually may cause harm to Nigerian and residents in Nigeria. For example, misinformation and disinformation, even though we've not all agreed on what these terms actually mean. But the point remains that if there is a content in your space that actually causes harm to citizens, it will not be good for the government to just fold its hands and keep quiet about it, even if it means ensuring that those big tech companies have some form of presence in order to bring them to the table to have a discussion around those issues. So our code of practice basically tries to provide a digital ecosystem that is safe for Nigeria. Last year, we actually had a policy for digital economy, which basically means developing the digital economy. And then, of course, our infamous reputation for scams and the fact that a lot of those scams are not actually from Nigeria itself. So we understood that there's a need to put some form of control on the impact of social media, using it as a loose word, on the citizens of Nigeria. For example, content that may be inimical, considering our local circumstances, content that is likely to incite one group of people against the other. Now, so what we are basically saying in this code of practice is just simply that there are laws in Nigeria. And so if you want to operate in Nigeria, you have to comply with those laws. And the whole essence is to ensure that the platforms that we call social media are not an ungovernable space where people can go and do whatever they like. So basically, the code applies to all those operating in Nigeria and how they impact on the citizens of Nigeria as a whole. The code also tries to give some form of responsibilities, like ensuring that you do have a presence here in the country. So if there are issues, we know who to talk to specifically and not running around. It also ensures that there's a dedicated channel to find complaints against certain issues that may violate copyrights that are placed on this platform. So basically, it's just to see how we can transliterate or transfer the laws of the land in Nigeria onto cyberspace. Thank you. That's just a nutshell of what we are trying to do. And considering the nature of the internet, which is a multi-stakeholder space, we have shared the content of this proposed regulation to every citizen in Nigeria, and we have requested for comment. Of course, I'll delve into the fears that a lot of people think that this is a disguise that will eventually end up in censorship of the internet. And we're trying to allay these fears by making this as open as possible and asking people, if you can identify any area of this code that will stifle your freedom of expression, that will stifle your innovation, come talk to us and we'll walk around and see how we can ensure that we protect citizens from the harmful content of these platforms without necessarily stifling innovation and putting an end to free speech.
Thank you, Manuel. I have one practical question, then we'll go to Ginger to see what are the comments in the chat, and I know Jovan has a comment. A quick practical question: when you mentioned that you consulted with the people, I know that, or at least in the news that we had, is that Twitter, Facebook, WhatsApp, TikTok were also invited to provide some input. So I wondered that whether you actually got any, because you still don't have the representation, formal representation of these companies in Nigeria. So I just wonder whether you actually got some comments from the big tech. But Jovan, you also wanted to comment.
Sure, Emmanuel, congratulations. As always, innovative inputs from initiatives where you are involved. What is my biggest concern? We know very little about this initiative. We know because you are our good colleague and former student, but you cannot find it in media. You cannot find it in policy spaces. And for a country, such a big country, with all diversities and tensions and basically, in a way, microcosms of the whole world, in all development aspects, conflict, tensions, interreligious dynamics. And it's fascinating what you're doing. How we can make sure that there is awareness of it, about it. And how I'm just asking it as a question to you, but also rhetorical questions to all of us. The biggest problem of the global media space is that we just hear one type of narratives, and we don't hear about this great policy experiment. We should make sure that it is covered, at least through our means, through our briefings, through writings, maybe blog posts from you, interview, but not for the sake of Nigeria, but for the sake of the rest of the world. We need to basically spread this story and make a bit louder voices of Nigeria, Africa, around the good and impactful initiatives.
Manuel, your reflections.
All right. Thank you very much, Jovan, and thank you as well, brother. Yes, we have engaged all possible social media platforms that have presence in Nigeria. I'm sure you're well aware of the issues that Nigeria had with Twitter last year, and the banning of Twitter and the unbanning of Twitter and certain conditions which we gave to Twitter to operate within Nigeria. And the whole essence of this is just that we are open as much as possible. Unfortunately, yes, there are issues around awareness, and considering the fact that this particular code was supposed to be enforced in Nigeria, we may have skipped a step of exposing them to the international community. But for the purpose of those on this call, I think if you want to have a sample of the code, is available on our website, which is nida.gov.ng. That's N for Nigeria, I for in, T for tax, D for development, A for alpha, .gov.ng, which is the code for Nigeria country code. So if you go there, you can navigate your way around and see a sample of the code. In fact, as I'm speaking to you, we are planning that sometime next week or thereabouts, we are going to have a second engagement with these platforms, because we had collected the input from the platforms on this particular code before it even went public, and we are collecting comments from the public right now. And so we want to meet again with these multinational platforms and discuss what their input was and our response to their input, and also show them the input from Nigerians regarding our attempt to ensure that this code is a code that will help Nigerians sanitize the internet space in Nigeria. And let us also remember that the focus of our agency in this particular aspect is just basically compliance. Yes, there may be sanctions after going to court for not complying with certain sections of the code, but it's basically a code that says Nigerian law should be obeyed in online space. But we would encourage compliance by the big tech, because somehow we believe that it is in the interest of both Nigerian government as a country and the big tech to use this platform in a manner that is safe and secure for Nigerians. And when we say safe and secure, we are talking in terms of content, to avoid misinformation and disinformation, to ensure there's child online protection, and ensure the kind of content that children have access to are not the same kind of content that adults actually have access to. So for Jovan's particular question, I think it's one of those things that you are doing something, but you really don't know the impact of what you're doing on the international community. And so when we come up with this kind of codes and we expect them to be applied in Nigeria, we do not really realize how this is going to affect the international community. And for bringing it to our knowledge, I'm sure henceforth, whatever we are doing as far as internet governance rules and guidelines are concerned, we'll try as much as possible to share with the global community whenever we can and wherever we can. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Emmanuel. Well, excellent showcase. I do have some follow-up questions, but I noticed there were a couple of questions in the comments in the chat. And before passing the floor to Ginger, Emmanuel, if you can write down in the chat the URL of your agency, that might be the easiest way at some point when you can. In the meantime, Ginger, the floor is yours. Try to summarize what was in the chat.
It's actually not long, but very, very interesting. I started out myself with smiling at seeing Emmanuel, of course, here with us. And as he opened talking about e-commerce and Jovan mentioned usability, I can't help but remember that 15 years ago, Emmanuel's focus was on e-commerce. He was ahead of his time. That was a great work with him. On the usability, Mark Carvel went ahead with an excellent question for Jovan, and I'm really interested in what Jovan will respond. Mark says on infrastructure, he agrees that undersea cables are in actuality making progress. As Jovan said, it's not a critical problem anymore. But is there still a challenge to extend backbone networks regionally, especially to landlocked countries in Africa? So that is a question for Jovan. Then Dorcas kind of linked our first and second topics, noting Emmanuel's reference to the institutions and Jovan's points as well when Dorcas says Google opening its first AI research center in Ghana looks promising, and the continent will need such institutions and networks too. Mark Mark, I don't know if you'd like to unmute yourself, but for the moment, I will continue with Mark's comment. Mark says he appreciates Emmanuel's explanation on relationships with the platforms. Very interesting. African policymakers on digital content regulation would benefit from sharing their thinking and proposals, for example, with the UK government's online safety legislation currently going through the UK Parliament on how to find the right balance on freedom of expression and innovation and preventing harms and protection of children online. The IGF and ADIS would be an opportunity for parliamentarians to exchange views on regulation and codes of practice. So a couple questions for you guys here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ginger. Excellent set of questions. I'll probably reflect on the second part with maybe a meta question afterwards to both of you on this cooperation between different jurisdictions and regulators. But before that, if you want to reflect, well, you touched upon, Jovan, already on this infrastructure that to some extent what is needed is actually outreaching to those that are not economically powerful to get the benefits of the connectivity, and probably what we see from the Telecom Development Conference as well and the fundraising for that, it's actually connecting the schools, connecting the remote areas and so on. But feel free to comment, Jovan and Emmanuel, if you wish as well on connectivity. Jovan.
The first, Mark, as always, excellent question. Therefore, submarine cables are coming to African countries, but there is a challenge for the landlocked countries. And there are, I would say, two good news with one caveat. One is that in Africa, we have increasing number of infrastructural projects, like railways, like gas pipelines, oil pipelines. And typically, when you have this type of projects, the fiber optic cables are laid along these systems. This is how, in the 19th century, telegraph network was developed in the UK along the railroad lines. Therefore, there will be more and more fiber optics and broadband coming to the landlocked and the remote regions. This is one development. The second one is about satellites. I mentioned SpaceX, but also other satellites programs of European Union, Chinese companies, and that's also is going to be help with the local connectivity, low orbit satellites. Therefore, there will be some moves. I would say the shift of discussion will be more towards protection of the vulnerability of those actors. I can see that there will be economic interest and other interest to provide connection. But what type of connection? What about net neutrality? We remember the free basics by Facebook and the other issues, or protection of data, or protection of identity of those people who do not have a capacity currently to protect themselves. Now, I see that in the coming year, from the typical making connections, the discussion will evolve into ensuring that those people who are connected, that their interests, especially future interests, are protected, and that they are encouraged to use meaningfully digital networks for education, health, business, and other issues. That's my guess, that it will be a shift. And I will just on this point reflect on the Mark question on the sharing of practices. It is extremely important because issues that people face on the, let's say, balance between freedom of expression and content policy. It is a very delicate issue. Emmanuel already outlined that. And usually one can make trade-offs, but make good mechanisms to avoid misuse of this system. And you have experiences and expertise worldwide. It's not centralized in one place like Napoleonic Code, where you had France developing the best the obligation law and contract law and then shared worldwide. Now you have expertise in Nigeria, which is very interesting, which may be shared with some European countries who are developing similar law. And that IGF could be an excellent place, and I'm sure you will reflect on more on parliamentarians, Vlada. They as a community which has to discuss these laws and to adopt. Therefore, if we connect all of these dots, there could be some promising developments in internet governance.
And it's good that we are again moving from just connectivity to all these other elements. What you mentioned with the new technologies like the satellites, And we are currently doing a light mapping within this African studies, also on the satellite programs or space programs, if you wish, of some of the African countries, where there'll be a map within the Digital Watch and African portal in the future. How many countries, African countries, are actually turning to launching the satellites. So that is something that's taking off. And the other thing is what you mentioned when it comes to the parliamentarians, there will be an interesting session, or the whole part of the program of the African IGF in Malawi in mid-July for parliamentarians. So I think this is a very important question. And with this, I'm turning also to Emmanuel. Emmanuel, a question actually related to the second part that Jovan touched upon and Mark initiated. So did you, to some extent, manage to communicate or consult the work of the other regulatory bodies around the world? The UK has mentioned, we know that the EU has been working on Digital Services Act. There are many others that are working on that, China and the others. Have you managed to get in touch, or do you see the mechanism how you could possibly work together in future to find a common ground, learn from each other, and maybe even reduce the level of fragmentation of the jurisdictions and the regulations? Emmanuel.
All right. Thank you very much, Vlada. And sincerely, I would say that we did not actually contact anyone outside Nigeria when we were considering this particular code of practice, and we actually thought it was something that we could handle by ourselves. But on hindsight, and having spoken to you, I think it's something that we will share with the international community as well, basically trying to explain what we are doing. That's the answer to the question which Mark posed, and also the comment by Jovan. And if I go back, talking about issues such as connectivity, I think one of the experiences we've had in Nigeria is that wireless connectivity tends to grow faster than wired connectivity. And so a lot of times you have these base stations by telecoms companies spreading broadband access as much as possible, wireless access, for a certain period of time before wired access actually gets to a particular location. So this has helped us a lot in terms of improving the teledensity, as they call it, of Nigeria as a whole. So as more technology comes out, apart from satellite technology and the wireless access, the 5G, of course, we are experiencing a growth in broadband penetration here in Nigeria. Of course, Nigeria has a broadband plan, which we are hoping to cover the country, I think about 80% within the next 3 or 4 years, and ensure that people have access to the internet. So I think most countries would do what suits them, just to identify the model that would serve the country better. And as far as internet issues are concerned, I think we all need to communicate better when dealing with this kind of issue. And for our code of practice, we have received a lot of comments, even from international community, including Amnesty International, expressing their position as far as human rights is concerned based on the codes that we are coming up with. So we're taking all this into consideration while we try as much as possible to bring on board as many people as possible within and outside Nigeria. Thank you.
Manuel, thank you again for joining. I think this was very useful discussion. Well, we could continue for hours as always, but feel free to stay with us in chat and maybe reflect further if there are any reflections. And I'll turn back to Johan for maybe last question before we move to AI and the second topic. And there was a question that came to LinkedIn actually about the whole discussion. What is the role of the Global Digital Compact that the UN Secretary General is announcing? Can you see that it can actually play any sort of a harmonizing role across, not just for Africa, but maybe across these various now fragmented policies across the world? What is the role of the Digital Global Compact in future for these sort of things?
Well, the starting position is not very good because, as we know, multilateralism is in a huge crisis, and we know what's going on in the global politics, not necessarily digital politics, but global politics. But Global Compact provides some useful building blocks. First, the Global Compact argues for the social contract between within the countries, the regions, and on the global level. In other fields, including climate change, but also digital. And that, I think that element is very important. The second point, it focuses, also mentions cybersecurity. And third point, it also focuses on the rights of future generation. What we are going to basically leave to the next generation of citizens, those who are not born yet or who are very young, what we are going to leave in the terms of legacy. We got very, I would say, solid cultural legacy in literature, in architecture, in arts, in music. What we are going to pass to the next generation? Are they going to have the chance to visit the I don't know, Egyptian pyramids or Grand Chinese Wall? That's an interesting issue. That's not that, but I'm just putting in the wider context. But there is another extremely important news. As you know, the tech envoy is appointed, and we will have a really capable Indian diplomat, Amandeep Gill, who has a lot of experience, but also broader understanding of cultural context on AI, who will, I guess, lead the efforts on the Global Compact. Well, my advice would be that Africa in particular takes very active role in the contributing to Global Compact and using this new policy context and policy document as a space to put more, to make a stronger and louder African voices.
Excellent. And we'll try to make some follow-up discussions with the new tech envoy once he takes the office and starts planning, hopefully in the early spring, in early autumn. And with this, we are moving to the second topic, the second trending topic of the today's briefing, and that is the artificial intelligence. We have been discussing that in the past number of times. Certainly, what I'm sure many of you have followed is this buzz around the sentient AI and the Google case, and then whether actually the AI can have feelings and decide on its own, and or it's all just the distraction from the real problems of the AI on humanity. So before moving to further discussion with Jovan, I wanted to invite our colleague Anja Djajic, who is from Diplo's AI lab, to help us maybe decode or explain technically, but in a simple, plain language, where are we currently when it comes to AI? Are we that far that we can expect that at some near point the AI will become sentient and smart and all of that? Or we're still in very early phase and much of that is hype? So I'm inviting Anja to join us remotely. And Anja, if you can help us with, brief decoding, where are we now? How much of that is a buzz actually?
Hello, everyone, and thank you for the invitation. It's my pleasure to speak in front of our AI and data lab. So when it comes to huge hype about AI in the latest months, definitely on the one hand, there is a reason, because we're having huge progress in many fields like computer vision, self-driving cars, robotics, and natural language processing as well. But on the other hand, I think that we are still far away from consciousness and from AI taking over the world. So when we are speaking about self-driving cars, there are 5 levels in that field, where level 0 is no automation at all, and level 5 is full automation. We are currently at level 2, which is called partial automation, where we have system that can take over steering, acceleration, braking in some situation, but it's still supervised by humans. So a person that needs to change lanes, to just look at traffic lights and so, but it can accelerate at some point. So and when it comes to natural language processing, maybe we are a little biased about that field because it's our main field of research, but I think in past years that's the field with biggest improvements and breakthroughs, because in 2017 Google introduced new architecture of neural network, which is called transformers. And that was the first time that we could tackle, and we try to consider context of input sentence and long-term dependencies in sentences. And in 2019, Google introduced BERT, which was a transformer-based architecture that is which empowered their search. So in 2019, we could use search that has context that is embedded in it. And I think that we shouldn't be aware of AI taking over the world, and that buzz about LaMDA and consciousness in AI. One of Google's AI researchers, one of the senior researchers, shared his transcript of a conversation with AI-based chatbot, where he said, like, we are having sentient and its consciousness, and because it could imitate human way of writing, and it was talking about its emotions. But definitely, when you ask it about what makes him feel pleasure and joy, it's answering something like he loves to spend time with his family and friends and helping the others. AI algorithm definitely doesn't have family or friends. So that's the point where we can see that even if he can talk about its emotions, he doesn't have it. And it's just still based on statistically most likely answer to the input question. So it's trained on some huge amount of text, and it's just answering the most likely response. It doesn't have anything to deal with emotions and consciousness, but just statistically the most likely sentence. And definitely, I think we are not having like hazard of AI taking over the world, but definitely I would like to point out misuse of AI and deep fake algorithms, and some in the past months we could see that it made mess even in politics. So definitely deep fake is developed, and we should more be aware of misuses of AI rather than it takes over the world.
Thank you, Anya, for this great explanation, and even comforting us a little bit that we shouldn't be afraid of the AI taking the world yet. But you also introduced a very good point where I want to pass the floor to Jovan. Jovan, your reflections on exactly on the last part that Anya raised. Is this so distracting us? And we understand this is a huge buzz because you have to sell the AI as well, and you always pump it and make a. But is it actually distracting us from the real events? I'll just give one example, which was very recent, I think 2 days ago, where we had the news that the mayor of Berlin and some other cities around Europe have had conference calls with Vitaly Klitschko, the mayor of Kiev, which appeared after a couple of minutes that it was a deep fake. And they were all confused. Some of them managed to understand it was a deep fake because the conversation didn't go naturally, questions were strange. Some of them didn't. They had to check whether it was him, then they got the confirmation was not him. So we have very, very tangible problems today. And then we have these questions about any reflections from your side?
Sure. I guess you can guess in what direction my reflection will be. Being very sensitive about any hype, tech hype and policy hype, this is example of huge risk. We spend our energy, our processing, cognitive energy, time, events, discussing issues which are great to discuss. You know that I love philosophy and I love science fiction, and but I can do it privately and enjoy it a lot. But having major newspapers covering something which is, as Anya indicated, to the large extent hype about emotions of AI, it's a bit tricky. Because people are reading, they're going to parliaments, they're discussing, there will be IGF, and we'll have another iteration of nice discussions about ethics, about AI, about future. Future is so lovely to discuss. It's so tolerant. You can say whatever you want. But what is happening is that in the meantime, there are changes which are affecting society, whether it is deepfake, as you mentioned, and Anya, or basically codifying the patterns of our behavior. Community data is moving into the patterns. Who owns these patterns? What is the traffic? There was a famous case of Google in Bangalore. Who owns the patterns about the traffic? And this is the major shift. Patterns of our behavior, individual, group, community, and global, have been codified. And somebody is putting ownership of it. Could you expect one day, in most radical scenario, that somebody will say, okay, this is the writings of Shakespeare or Aristotle or Kant, and it is now owned by our company because we identify patterns in these writings. It sounds surrealistic, but it is what is happening with photos. Suddenly, these tags are, you cannot find, difficult to find a free photo on the net. 5 or 6 years ago, it was one of the sharing principles. I would focus more on that. Because while dogs are barking, caravans are passing. There is some saying in the Balkan, the collective culture. Let's make dogs bark on the real things, on deepfake, on misuse of the privatization of patterns, societal behavior, on these issues. And I think there are some serious attempts, especially EU AI.
That is the question. So if we flip the coin and say, okay, those were the risks, and we should be more aware of the risks. At the same time, we see, I would say, a bunch of initiatives that are coming by regulators, and I'll mention just a few. The EU is coming with the AI Act, and the Czech presidency has already shared the draft paper, so we expect some communication during the summer. China has issued this law on algorithms asking for more transparency, avoiding manipulation, and so on. We have seen the UNESCO recommendations on ethics on AI. We have seen the BRICS declaration just some days ago. Also, that's interesting, mentioning the AI in like a couple of sentences, and what they mentioned, number of risks like manipulation, ethics, and so on. But interestingly, they also mentioned the risks of singularity of the AI. So you can see it also over there. So we see a number of initiatives. I guess the US is also working on that. Is that a signal that actually the states or the regulators are taking it more seriously?
But one point, but you were making this geographical journey all over the world. One thing which we always underestimate, that governments, regardless of their geopolitical tensions, which are now in the focus of media, very often share the common challenges: online taxation, AI, data, privacy, deepfake, cybersecurity. And I think we should nurture these common points more. And in this case, you mentioned some really important regulation like EU initiative, which I think it's very, very smart and well done regulation, identifying where you can apply existing law to AI, where you should adjust existing law to be applicable, and what are the areas will be of unknown or known unknowns. And this is let's say, this is that I think 5 or 10%, somebody calculated, of unknown unknowns. Okay, we should put it, maybe we can introduce precautionary principle from environmental law. There are ways to do it, but the problem is that this 5 to 10% very often take at least 50% of the global public focus, because people are discussing this ethics, emotions, consciousness, and that's a problem. And we have a limited policy capacity or cognitive capacity to process information. This is a huge risk, and I think EU legislation is very good. We analyze also Chinese regulation algorithm, which is very detailed and well balanced. And there are many in the United States. There are serious discussion in the Congress or on the AI. Therefore, I'm more optimistic that we'll have a serious discussion what is happening now and here when it comes to AI, and then have some fun with future talks.
And what's interesting is also some of the companies are sort of self-regulating. For instance, Microsoft has released this sort of a new guidance on AI or responsible AI standards and so on. So can we hope that there'll be some more of the self-regulation which is not imposed by the others?
Well, the companies are aware that this is a slippery slope, and that society may basically be regulatory much tougher than with the previous digital regulation. I would be very critical because there is this ethics guidelines inflation. At one point, and we stopped counting, I think 2 years ago, we identified 400 guidelines. And you know how is it with the inflation, like with the money? The more guidelines you have, the less useful they are. We may need some very, very simple rule like habeas corpus act from UK, or Magna Carta Libertatum, or Hammurabi's law, that you have it in a few lines and you put it clearly. I'm a bit critical about ethics washing, you know, you mention it, but then you do it. But good news is that companies are aware that they have to be careful about it, because society may have a tougher regulatory response on AI than on previous issues.
Good. Ginger, I noted there were a couple of reflections in the chat. I know that some were reflected on the previous discussion. Were there any reflections on the AI aspects and any questions and comments, Ginger?
Yes, as a matter of fact, there were, and I would like to mention that because it was a very interesting point Jovan made about digital contact. David says that we have to be careful about overstating what the digital compact will be, since member states still haven't officially endorsed it. More importantly, it will be the multi-stakeholders who negotiate what will include still lots of runway before this plane takes off. And Manny added to that the request for input to the global compact offers valuable opportunity for the individual and institutional perspectives from across the world, especially from developing countries. To that, Nigel added, really important stakeholders make input on digital compact. The UK government will certainly take notice of what is said. And there was a mention of the work with Eurojig and a survey coming up. To the current discussion, Philippa noted a very practical aspect that pre-2016, she could not use Google Translate for her Arabic homework, but there was a stepwise increase. It got much better very suddenly with the transition to neural networks. A little more discussion on the tech envoy. But Avery asked us, is AI an effective tool for humans who aspire to greater power and to take over the world? But that takes it more into another realm and opens up discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ginger. Excellent points. Obviously, we'll have to continue these discussions. Jovan, maybe the last couple of tweets from your side on this topic.
What was Avery's comment?
It was whether, if I understood correctly, Ginger, whether the AI can actually inspire us humans to take over the world. Was that a question, Ginger?
Oh, more or less. Yes, she was talking more about the malicious input, I think, of being used by bad actors.
When there are comments from Avery, Parmin, and Richard Hill, they're always well thought from different angles. This is why I ask for this comment. Well, the famous saying is that technology is a tool. It's neither good nor bad nor neutral, and we will see what will happen. But what we how we can reduce this relativity that technology can go in another direction is by ensuring that there is societal context in which technology is used or misused. And this is what we, as thinking, hopefully rational beings, as humans should be, at least in theory, that we can do through our joint efforts. And in this context, Secretary General call for the social contracts is a call for debates, engagement in societies worldwide, given their cultural differences or political differences, on the way how they can responsibly manage their societal relations and digital ones. And this is one of the turning points in the history of humanity, where we have to step back if we can and see in what direction we will manage this rock in Milky Way, which happened to be inhabited by humans for thousands of years and with great achievements, but also quite a few failures. Therefore, that's important point, and digital will play important role in it.
And if we can summarize it back with what Danya said, that we shouldn't be afraid that the AI can take over the world, at least for now, and we can probably focus on the topics at the table and work more on that. Thank you. We'll continue with this discussion definitely in future. We'll just use another 2 minutes to briefly take a look at what we missed in this discussion, what we call the ID barometer, which is what were the biggest pressure points when it comes to digital policy. And as you can see, in most of the areas that we follow, the pressure was rather high. We mentioned some of them. The UN Tech Envoy was appointed. In terms of cybersecurity, it's interesting that the ICRC has come up with some recommendations for protecting the humanitarian data. And I guess we can expect more of that and the role of the ICRC in future in global negotiations, in the open-ended working group and others. We have seen some DDoS attacks of the huge scale. We have seen some last-minute information about cyber attacks on Lithuania, but we haven't had time to check on that, so we'll get back on that to you later. When it comes to the market, crypto market, this time the Celsius, the lending platform, had huge problems. So this discussion is, or this trend is sort of continuing. When it comes to infrastructure, very important news is that EU has adopted a single standard for the plugs, for power plugs for mobile phones. So we are really happy about that. And finally, when it comes to content policy, China has published rules for influencers. We still have to see how this is going to go, but that's a very, very interesting one. Moving on to what we can expect next month, basically when it comes to the development, certainly we have the summer coming, so we are not expecting too much to happen, but we do have a high-level political forum on sustainable development, so we hope in the next round of our briefing, sustainable development will also be higher on the agenda. And finally, when it comes to Diplo, what you can expect from us in the next, over the summer period, there'll be a very interesting web debate, which you can follow, but you can find more information on Diplo's and GIP website. And finally, a number of summer courses, as we like to call them, where we have the internet technology policy, an interesting course covering different aspects of emerging policies, as well as the advanced diploma in internet governance. For those of you that are new, well, you can probably ping Ginger directly. She'll tell you much more about this very good program in internet governance. We'll stop there the briefing. I'll remind you that there is Digital Watch with all this information of what's happening around the world in digital policy in all these areas. So make sure you get back to it often, see what's happening, subscribe to the newsletters. You have the monthly ones, the weekly ones. There'll be a bunch of other activities, particularly as of September. And when it comes to the IG briefing, we'll make a break, summer break. And then we'll see you at the end of September, the last Tuesday of the month, as always. The end of September, we'll take some more time. And in September, we'll look back at what happened during the summer. But I do hope the summer will not be as harsh as sometimes it used to be in the previous years. I wish you a great summer holiday if you can afford it, if you can manage it, if you can take some time off. And see you online. See you in September. Thank you for joining. Bye-bye.
Recording stopped.